Put on your yarmulke, here comes Hanukkah. So much funaka to celebrate Hanukkah.
Okay, so we've just finished learning about the Phoenicians, who we know inhabited what we now call parts of Lebanon and Palestine. And there were also other people living close by. The Hebrew people, who were later referred to as the Jews. Today, we will discuss the history of these early Mediterranean inhabitants. Ancient Palestine has always been sort of a crossroads for early civilizations as they engaged in trade. Its location along the eastern Mediterranean made it perfect for this. The Hebrew people settled in between the Jordan River and the Red Sea, in an area of land sometimes referred to as Canaan. Much of early Jewish history comes from the Jewish holy book called the Torah. The Torah corresponds to roughly the first 5 books of the Bible, as Christianity eventually morphed from Judaism. The father of the Jewish people was Abraham, who was chosen to take the Hebrew people to, quote-unquote, the Promised Land. Abraham took the Jewish people all the way from Ur in Mesopotamia to Canaan. Unlike other civilizations in Mesopotamia, which were polytheistic, the Jewish people were monotheistic, which means that they believed in one God. Eventually, from the Jewish faith, we will see the emergence of both Christianity and Islam, both of which are monotheistic as well. Abraham is believed to have established a covenant with God. A covenant is a promise. Eventually, the Jews migrated to Egypt because of drought and famine. While in Egypt, they were enslaved by the Egyptians. The Jews fled Egypt sometime between 13 and 1200 BC in what eventually became known as the Exodus. The man responsible for leading the Jews from slavery was Moses. An Egyptian pharaoh, feeling threatened by the rising popularity of Judaism in Egypt, had ordered all male babies killed. According to the Torah, Moses was hidden by his mother in the reeds along the Nile, and then traveled in a reed basket along the Nile before being found by an Egyptian princess who raised him. Once grown, Moses was commanded by God, it is believed, to lead the Jews out of Egypt. God helped the Jews escape from Egypt by supposedly inflicting 10 plagues on all of Egypt. The 10th of these plagues was the death of the firstborn male in all families. The Jews were able to escape this plague by slaughtering a lamb and then placing its blood upon the door of their homes, hence telling God to pass over their homes and not kill their firstborn son. Because the Jews left Egypt in such a hurry, there was evidently not enough time to leaven their bread, which means that there was not enough time for their bread dough to rise. This Exodus is celebrated today during the holiday of Passover, and unleavened bread is consumed. So Moses led the Jews out of Egypt, traveling across the Sinai Peninsula. It was on the top of Mount Sinai that Moses is believed to have received the 10 Commandments from God, written on large stone tablets. These commandments, along with many of the teachings of Moses, became the basis for the civil and religious laws of Judaism, later written in the Talmud. The Jews evidently wandered and lived in the desert for 40 years, eventually settling in the land of Canaan. There were originally 12 tribes of Hebrew people to settle in Canaan, the largest of which was called Judah. Eventually, this is where the words Judaism and Jews come from. The Jews united their people under three early kings, Saul, David, and Solomon, between 1020 and 922 BC. Their kingdom became known as Israel. Solomon eventually constructed a temple in Jerusalem, which housed the 10 Commandments tablets inside of a box-like container called the Ark of the Covenant. And not to be sacrilegious, but okay, watch Raiders of the Lost Ark. Anyway, following King Solomon's death, the kingdom divided into Israel and Judah. In 738 BC, both kingdoms stopped paying tribute or peace money to the Assyrians, who we're going to learn about next. The Assyrians had taken over much of the Middle East at that point. By 722, most of the kingdom of Judah and Israel had been destroyed, and the surviving Jews were forced to move to Babylon under the Babylonian king, King Nebuchadnezzar. It was eventually the Persians, who we will learn about shortly, under King Cyrus the Great, who allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild. Eventually, other empires controlled Israel, including the Persians, then the Greeks, and then the Romans. But more on that later. Thanks for listening. Bye.